The transmission came through every screen on Earth at the same moment, not just televisions and phones, billboards, hospital monitors, the display on the coffee machine in my office. Every single screen on the planet lit up simultaneously, and a voice that was not human spoke in 93 languages at once. I was standing in the middle of the Geneva liaison station when it happened. My coffee was still hot. That detail stayed with me for years afterward, the way strange small things do when the world changes around them. The creature on the screen was called a Valkyrie. Tall, draped in pale ceremonial fabric, with 4 narrow eyes arranged in a vertical line down the center of its face. It looked exactly like every diplomat I had ever met, in the sense that it looked like it had never once doubted the importance of its own words. "People of Earth," it said, and every translator on the planet rendered those words perfectly. "The Galactic Council extends formal notification. The Sol system falls within the recognized sovereignty corridor of the Drell hegemony. Under Council Statute 7 Alpha, all non-registered civilizations occupying claimed territory must vacate within 60 standard cycles. Failure to comply will result in hegemony-authorized processing." Processing. I was 43 years old at that point, and I had spent 15 of those years as Earth's official liaison to the Galactic Council. I knew what processing meant. It was the word the Drell used the way an old empire uses the word pacification. It meant removal. It meant they would come and they would push us out of our own solar system, and they did not particularly care what condition we were in when they did it. 60 standard cycles, translated to roughly 8 months by Earth's calendar. The Valkyrie spokesperson finished its statement and waited. I imagined in that moment the billions of people watching their screens, parents pulling their children close, politicians reaching for their phones, soldiers checking their equipment, priests opening their books, 8 billion people absorbing the same information at the same time, and then the screen went dark. I looked at Colonel Owen Drake, my deputy, who was standing 3 feet away from me holding a clipboard, as if he had forgotten it was in his hand. "Well," he said. "Yeah," I said. "My name is Yara Osai. I had spent 15 years being polite, patient, and diplomatic with creatures that regarded humanity the way most people regard a pigeon, mildly interesting, not worth concern, harmless by nature." I picked up my secure line and called Director General Philip Crane in New York. He answered on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting. "You saw it," I said. "The whole planet saw it," he said. "What do the Council actually intend to do?" "Nothing," I said. "I already know the answer. I've known it since I took this job. We are not members. We have no registered status. We are a Class 2 civilization in their records, which means we are interesting enough to catalog but not important enough to protect. The Drell filed the correct paperwork. As far as the Council is concerned, this is a legal matter, not a moral one." There was a pause. "So they're going to let this happen, unless someone gives them a reason not to." Crane was quiet for a moment. I could hear him breathing. He was a careful man, which was usually a good quality. Today I needed him to be something different. "Draft our response," he said finally. "Keep it short." I drafted it in 11 minutes. The final version was approved by 31 heads of government within 6 hours, which remains the fastest international consensus in recorded human history. We broadcast it on every frequency the Council monitored. It was 4 words: "We will not leave." I will not pretend the first week was calm. It was not. The United Nations building in New York had to be closed due to protests. 7 governments collapsed. The stock markets closed for 5 days. Religious organizations released statements ranging from serene acceptance to furious defiance, and somehow both felt completely human. But underneath all of that noise, something else was happening, something quieter. I noticed it first in the military channels. The language shifted. The planning shifted. People stopped talking about evacuation logistics and started talking about other things. I heard words like fortification, like countermeasures, like engagement parameters. On the 5th day after the transmission, I received a message from a Velkari diplomat on an encrypted personal channel. It was not an official communication. There was no council seal, no formal registry number. Just text, sent to a frequency that very few people even knew existed. His name was Sorvith. I had met him twice at council sessions. He was quieter than most Velkari, with a habit of watching a room rather than performing for it. He had once told me that he found humans exhausting and fascinating in equal measure, which I had taken as a compliment. His message was short. Commander Osai, I'm going to tell you something that I cannot tell you through official channels, because it would violate 17 council protocols and also because it would terrify my superiors. The Drell have done this 17 times in the past 400 years. 17 civilizations were presented with the same ultimatum you received today. 16 of them eventually complied. The one that did not was a species called the Thren. They resisted for 9 months. They no longer exist. I am not telling you this to encourage surrender. I am telling you this because the Drell expect a pattern. They have never encountered a species that disrupted the pattern before it became their expectation. Make them afraid of you before the deadline. Not during, before. I will say nothing more on this subject. I read it 3 times. Then I printed it, folded it, and put it in my jacket pocket. I called Owen into my office. I closed the door. I handed him the printed message. He read it slowly. He set it on the desk. He looked at me. How long do we actually need? He asked. 8 months is what they gave us, I said, so we'll use 7. And the 8th? I looked out the window at the Swiss mountains, pale and enormous against the morning sky. The 8th month, I said, is theirs. Owen nodded once, the way soldiers do when a plan is terrible and correct at the same time. The Council's official response to our broadcast came 48 hours later. It was delivered by the same Velkari spokesperson, in the same 93 languages, with the same absolute certainty. They acknowledged our message. They noted our non-compliant status. They reminded us that we had 58 cycles remaining, and that the Council could not intervene in hegemony territorial management on behalf of unregistered civilizations. They also, and this part I found genuinely interesting, wished us well. I stood in front of my staff after we received that message. 12 people, all of whom had given their careers to this liaison office, all of whom had spent years learning to navigate a galactic political system that had never once truly seen us as equals. They were watching me. They were waiting to find out if the person they had followed into this impossible corner had anything useful to say. I thought about the Thren, a species that no longer existed. I thought about 16 civilizations that had eventually complied. I thought about what that word, eventually, cost each of them. I thought about Sorvith's message, make them afraid of you before the deadline. All right, I said, here is what I need from each of you. I did not raise my voice. I did not try to inspire anyone. I just told them what we were going to do. They got to work immediately, all of them, without a word of doubt. That, I thought, was the thing the Drell had never modeled in their projections. They had read our history. They had catalogued our conflicts and our crises and every catastrophe we had ever survived. They thought that data told them what we were. It told them almost nothing. What they did not understand, and what no outside observer had ever truly understood, was what happens to human beings when someone threatens everything they have. We do not shut down. We do not fragment. We get very, very quiet, and then we get to work. I took Sorvith's message out of my pocket that night and read it one final time. Make them afraid of you before the deadline. I set it on my desk and started writing orders. 7 months. Everything changed in 7 months, and the galaxy had no idea it was coming. Neither, honestly, did I not fully. But I had learned something in 15 years of diplomatic service that no political training had ever explicitly taught me. The most dangerous moment in any negotiation is not when both sides are angry. It is when one side stops being afraid and the other side has not yet realized it. The Drell were not afraid of us. That was about to become their most expensive mistake. I closed my notebook, turned off the light, and went to find Owen Drake to begin planning something the galaxy had never seen before. Outside the window, the mountains were dark and still. The stars above them were the same stars they had always been, except now I looked at them differently. Not as a ceiling, as a direction. We had 7 months. It would be enough. The morning after I sent Owen Drake to begin the logistics planning, I received a call from General Constance Ward, head of the Unified Defense Command. She was 61 years old, built like someone who had never learned the word comfortable, and she had a habit of beginning conversations already in the middle of them. "I need 30 minutes, she said, before I even said hello. "Come to Geneva," I said. "I'm already in the elevator." She arrived at my office 40 minutes later, which meant she had been in the building before she called. I chose not to mention it. She sat down without being invited, spread a physical map across my desk the old-fashioned way, and pointed to 3 locations in the outer solar system. Before the transmission even finished, she said, we had people asking the right questions. Here, here, and here. The Kuiper Belt. 18 months ago, we pushed through a classified budget item for deep field mining infrastructure. The Council's observers cataloged it as commercial development. It is not commercial development. I looked at the 3 points on the map. How long has this been in progress? Since the first time a Drell surveyor passed through our system without announcing itself, she said. That was 14 months ago. We noticed. We said nothing publicly. We started building. This was the first time I truly understood something about my own species that I had only previously suspected. While I had spent 15 years trying to earn humanity a seat at the diplomatic table, other humans had been quietly preparing for the possibility that the table itself was not safe. We were not a unified people. We argued constantly, governed badly, disagreed on almost everything. But under all of that noise, there was something like a shared instinct, and that instinct, when pushed, pointed in a very specific direction. "Tell me everything," I said. Ward spoke for 3 hours. By the time she finished, my coffee was cold and I had filled an entire notebook. Project Counterweight had been running under 17 different budget classifications, distributed across 6 nations and 3 private aerospace contractors, none of whom knew the full picture. It was not a single program. It was a philosophy implemented by thousands of people who had each been told just enough to do their part. The repurposed mining rigs alone were extraordinary. 17 platforms, each the size of a small city block, originally designed to extract silicate from Kuiper Belt objects. They had been quietly modified over 13 months. Their extraction arms could now accelerate projectiles. Their navigation systems had been rebuilt with military-grade response times. Their cargo bays were full. "What are they full of?" I asked. Ward told me. I sat back in my chair. "We made those," I said. "We made those," she said, and she almost smiled. "We also made approximately 900 autonomous response units, currently dormant, positioned in clusters along 6 potential approach vectors. The Council's observers swept our inner system twice in the past year. They found a weather satellite program and some commercial debris. They were looking in the wrong places." This was the part that stayed with me. The misdirection had not been planned as a single operation. It had emerged from a dozen separate decisions made by people who did not know about each other, all of whom had independently concluded that if something was coming, it was better to be ready than to be honest about being ready. We were not told to deceive the Council. We just did it naturally, because we have been deceiving much larger and more powerful entities for the entirety of our existence as a species, and we had become very good at it. The next morning, I called an emergency session with the 6 permanent members of the new wartime coalition, which had been assembled quietly over the previous 72 hours. They came in person. No video links, no remote attendance. The room was swept 3 times before anyone sat down. Director General Crane was there. Ward, Admiral Leon Faris, who commanded what remained of the International Naval Space Force, Dr. Nina Aldridge, who ran the AI systems program out of a facility in New Zealand that officially did not exist, Colonel Owen Drake, and a man named Patrick Hollies, who had no official title and whose name appeared on no government record, but who seemed to know things about Drell tactical history that nobody on Earth should have known. I asked Hollies directly how he knew what he knew. He looked at me with the expression of someone who has answered a question many times in their head, but never out loud. "I have been talking to Sorvith for 6 years," he said. "Not officially, through channels that do not exist on paper. He has been preparing for this possibility longer than any of us. He could not tell us directly, but he found ways." I thought about the message Sorvith had sent me, the precision of it, the timing, the specific instruction to act before the deadline rather than during it. He had not sent that message impulsively. He had been preparing that message for a long time. I pulled out my notebook and started writing faster. The plan took shape over the following 3 weeks. It was not elegant. It was not the kind of plan that looks clean on a presentation screen. It was layered and asymmetric and deliberately confusing because the first rule we established was this: the Drell use models. Everything they do is based on projected behavior. If we behaved in ways their models could not predict, their models would fail. And failed models in a military engagement mean fatal hesitation. Dr. Aldridge explained it with characteristic precision. "Their intelligence estimates us based on our history," she said. "Our history is full of wars, but all of those wars were against each other. They assume internal conflict equals fragmentation. They do not have a model for a species that fights itself constantly, and then, when threatened from outside, stops." "How long do we have before they update their models?" Ward asked. "The Drell update threat assessments every 40 cycles, Aldridge said. "Their next scheduled update is in 11 cycles. If we move before that update, we will be working against their previous assessment, the one that says we are incapable of coordinated interstellar response." 11 cycles was roughly 50 Earth days. We had already spent 21. The next weeks were the most extraordinary period I had witnessed in my lifetime, and I had witnessed a great deal. Every major shipyard on Earth and in near-Earth orbit shifted to wartime production. Not partially, completely. The transition happened so fast that Council observers flagged it in their reports, but their analysis came back as industrial expansion consistent with civilian infrastructure response to social disruption. They were not wrong, technically. They just did not understand that human industrial expansion during disruption is not slowing down. It is an acceleration. Asteroid mining vessels were refitted. Communications satellites were given secondary functions. The Deep Space Relay Network, built over 12 years for scientific purposes, turned out to be perfectly suited for coordinating a distributed military operation across a volume of space several billion kilometers wide. None of this was planned that way. Or rather, pieces of it were planned by different people for different reasons, and when the moment came, the pieces connected in ways that surprised even the people who had built them. Owen told me one evening, while we were reviewing logistics reports at 2 in the morning, that it reminded him of something his grandmother used to say. She had been an architect, and she had told him that the best buildings are the ones that look inevitable, as if they could not have been built any other way, even though they were the result of 1,000 small decisions made under pressure. "We are building something inevitable," he said. I looked at the reports spread across the desk. Let's hope it holds up, I said. 47 days before the deadline, the Drell Advance fleet arrived. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of our solar system, at a point beyond the orbit of Neptune, and they sent another message. This one was not for the Council. It was for us alone. 12 Drell warships, each 3 times the size of anything in our conventional fleet, arranged in a formation that their tactical doctrine called the final announcement. It meant they were not asking. It meant the counting had already happened and they had arrived to collect. Their commander identified himself. His name translated roughly as Vethorath, and his message was 49 seconds long and contained no new information. It was a repetition of the original ultimatum, dressed up with more specific descriptions of what would happen to those who remained after the deadline expired. It was designed to cause a particular emotion. They had done this 17 times. They knew exactly what they were doing. I read the transcription of the message twice. Then I set it face down on my desk, the same way I had set Sorvath's letter weeks earlier. I looked at Owen, he looked at me. "Begin Phase 1, I said. He picked up his radio. Outside in the dark, 7 months of quiet work woke up all at once. And the galaxy, for the first time, looked toward the Sol system with something it had not expected to feel. Unease. The unease lasted approximately 11 minutes. That was how long it took for the first of our dormant systems to power up, for the first of our concealed platforms to rotate and orient, for the Drell Advance fleet to realize that the space around them was not empty the way they had assumed it was empty. 11 minutes. Then everything happened very quickly. Their sensors picked us up 17 seconds before the first exchange began. I know this because the Drell commander's transmission records were recovered later, and you could hear the exact moment his tactical officers reported what was around them. There was a sound in that recording, a sound that I have thought about many times since, that had no good translation in any human language. The closest approximation, according to Dr. Aldridge's team, was something between surprise and the recognition that surprise has come too late. I was in the command bunker beneath the city of Johannesburg, 1,200 meters of reinforced earth and rock above my head. The room was cool and lit in red, filled with the kind of focused silence that only exists when every person present understands exactly what is happening and has nothing left to say about it. Owen Drake stood at the main coordination terminal. Admiral Ferris was on a secure link from the orbital relay station. General Ward was on the ground with the flight systems team, and I was standing behind the central display, watching a 3-dimensional map of the outer solar system, where 12 red markers representing Drell warships were suddenly surrounded by something that had not been there a moment before. Phase 1 was not a strike, it was a revelation. Every dormant system activated simultaneously. The 18 Kuiper belt platforms powered up and oriented. The 900 autonomous response units came online and moved to assigned positions. The deep space relay network shifted from passive observation to active coordination. In the space of 60 seconds, the volume of space surrounding the Drell Advance fleet went from appearing empty to containing more military infrastructure than most civilizations build in a century. We did not fire, not yet. We just let them see it. Owen read the telemetry quietly as it came in. Platform 7 is active and locked. Response units at grid reference 449 are in formation. Relay network is synchronized. He paused. They're scanning. Active military-grade scan. They want to know what they're looking at. Let them look, I said. 38 seconds passed. Then Vethorath transmitted again. This time the tone was different. Still controlled, because Drell commanders are trained for control, but there was something underneath the words that their training had not fully covered. He demanded to know the authorization codes for the military infrastructure surrounding his fleet. He stated that unregistered military assets in hegemony-claimed space constituted an act of aggression under Council Statute 9 Gamma. I almost respected the attempt. Using legal language in that moment was either very composed or very desperate, and I suspected it was both. Admiral Ferris spoke from the relay link. They've adjusted formation. They're tightening up, which means they're moving from approach posture to defensive posture. That's significant. It was significant. The Drell Advance Fleet, which had arrived in a configuration designed to communicate inevitability, had just acknowledged, through its own movement, that the situation was not what they had expected. Phase 2, I said. Owen relayed the order. What happened next was something that no Drell tactical officer had ever seen in 400 years of hegemony expansion, because no species had ever done it to them before. We did not attack their fleet. We attacked their understanding of where they were. The relay network, which had been built for scientific data transmission, could also transmit targeting solutions. High precision, continuously updated, distributed across dozens of nodes, so that destroying one node changed nothing about the others. The platforms did not need to aim themselves in real time. The network did it for them, constantly, simultaneously, with a level of coordination that was only possible because Dr. Aldridge had spent 4 years training an artificial intelligence system on the specific problem of distributed fire coordination in a variable gravity deep space environment. She had told the funding committee it was for asteroid collision response. The 12 Drell warships found themselves held in a precise targeting envelope by a system that had no central point to destroy. You could not cut the head off this operation because the operation did not have a head. It was distributed, redundant, and patient. Vethorath tried anyway. He sent 3 of his smaller vessels toward the nearest platform cluster, moving fast, using a Drell intercept pattern that had worked against 11 other species across 4 centuries. The pattern assumed that weapons platforms are stationary targets with fixed firing arcs and limited autonomous response capability. Ours were not stationary. They had been built by people who understood that the first thing an enemy will do is try to remove your weapons, so your weapons should be able to move. The platforms adjusted. The response units repositioned, and the 3 Drell intercept ships found themselves not approaching static targets but moving through a field that was reconfiguring around them in real time. Owen was watching the telemetry with the expression of someone trying very hard not to show relief. "They're separating from the formation," he said. "The intercept group is isolated." "How long before Vethorath calls them back?" I asked. Based on Drell's standard response time, he checked his screen. Maybe 90 seconds. It took Vethorath 64 seconds. The intercept group received the recall order and began to turn. The turning took 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, the isolated vessels passed through a section of space that the response units had already designated. The units acted on standing orders. The engagement was brief, precise, and completely one-sided. All 3 Drell intercept vessels were disabled, not destroyed, disabled. Their drive systems taken offline, their communications interrupted, their weapons systems locked by a frequency interference pattern that Aldridge's team had developed specifically for Drell model electromagnetic signatures. This distinction mattered enormously to me. We were not there to kill anyone if we could avoid it. We were there to make a point, and the point did not require destruction. It required demonstration. Vethorath's next transmission was louder, not in volume, in urgency. He called on the Galactic Council directly, bypassing us entirely, demanding intervention and characterizing what was happening as an unlawful military engagement by an unregistered civilization. I had been waiting for this. Because we were broadcasting the entire engagement on every frequency the Council monitored, every sensor reading, every telemetry update, every exchange. Not edited, not narrated, just transmitted, raw and complete, so that every intelligence service and every council member watching could see exactly what was happening and draw their own conclusions. This was Owen's idea, and it was the best idea anyone had in that entire 7-month period. He had argued for it 3 weeks earlier in the middle of the night when we were reviewing communications protocols. "The Council will not act to protect us," he had said, "but they will watch. Every species with a monitoring station in this region will watch. So let them watch all of it, not just the parts we choose, all of it. Let them see what a species that said no looks like when it means it." I had approved it immediately. The Council was watching. They were also, for the first time in a long time, very quiet. Admiral Ferris reported that 4 additional Drell vessels had shifted position, moving away from the disabled ships rather than toward them, which indicated they had correctly identified the response units as the threat and were trying to create distance from them. This was a reasonable tactical decision. It was also the wrong one, because the response units were distributed across a volume of space large enough that moving away from one cluster moved you closer to another. Vethorath was running calculations. I could tell because his transmission stopped for 4 minutes and 17 seconds, which is a very long time to be silent when 3 of your ships are disabled and everything around you is reconfiguring. When he spoke again, he asked for terms. Not from me. He asked the Council to broker terms. He framed it as a diplomatic request, a desire to resolve the situation through proper channels, consistent with Council protocols. It was well constructed. If the Council agreed, they would be inserting themselves as mediators, which would require them to acknowledge us as a party to the negotiation, which was a form of recognition. If they refused, they would be declining to prevent what was shaping up to be a very significant military engagement in their own governance territory. Director General Crane, watching from the New York Operations Center, sent me a single word through the secure line. "Elegant," he wrote. I sent back 2 words. "Not enough." Because Vethorath had made his move, now it was mine. I sent the order for Phase 3. The long-range stealth vessels, which had been in transit for 6 months, arrived at 3 Drell staging worlds simultaneously. Let me be precise about what that means. 6 months earlier, before the deadline, before the advance fleet, before any of this became visible, we had sent ships. Quietly. Through approaches that Drell surveillance networks were not watching, because we had spent several years learning which directions they were not watching. Through means I will not specify because Sorvith asked me, personally, not to. Those ships arrived now on schedule and broadcast their presence on all frequencies. They did not engage anything. They did not threaten anyone. They simply made themselves visible at 3 separate locations deep inside hegemony territory and sent a message. The message was 7 words. "We can reach you. We chose not to." Vethorath received this information from his own command network 16 seconds after our ships broadcast it. I watched the timestamp on his next transmission and counted the seconds myself. He did not transmit again for 11 minutes. When he did, his message was addressed to me directly, not to the Council, not to the Secretary General, to me by name, using the full formal title of my position, which meant he had done research and he wanted me to know he had done research. He said that he was prepared to discuss a temporary suspension of hegemony claims, pending formal Council review. I looked at Owen. He was already smiling, but he was trying to hide it. "How do you want to answer?" he asked. I thought about 16 civilizations that had complied. I thought about the Thren, who no longer existed. I thought about Sorvith's encrypted message, sent 6 weeks before all of this, from a diplomat who had spent years preparing quietly for a moment he could not participate in publicly. I thought about 8 billion people who had been told, by a creature with 4 eyes and ceremonial fabric, that they had 60 cycles to leave their home. "Tell him," I said, "that we are prepared to discuss terms, But he is going to call the council directly, and he is going to request an emergency session, and he is going to use the word acknowledge when he refers to Earth's government. Not organization, not entity, government. Owen wrote it down. He looked up. And if he refuses? I looked at the display. The 12 Drell warships, the 3 disabled vessels drifting at the edge of the formation, the platforms still oriented, the response units still positioned, the 3 ships deep in hegemony territory still broadcasting. Then Phase 4, I said, and after that whatever it takes. Vethoreth called the council and requested an emergency session. He used the word government. He used it 3 times, in fact, which I had not asked for, and which told me that whatever calculations he had run in those 11 minutes of silence had produced a result he did not enjoy. The council convened 42 hours later, and the galaxy gathered to watch. I went to put on my dress uniform for the first time in 7 months, and I thought, as I straightened the collar, about what Sorveth had said when I finally spoke to him directly, 2 days after the engagement ended. He had called me on the encrypted channel. His face on the screen was unreadable, which I had come to understand meant he was feeling something he did not want to display. "Did you know?" I asked him. "Did you know we could do this?" He was quiet for a moment. "I knew you were the right kind of species," he said. "I did not know if you were ready. There is a difference." He paused. "You were ready." I closed my uniform jacket and went to face the council. Whatever happened in that chamber, I thought, nothing would ever be the same after this. Not for them, not for us. The display in the Johannesburg bunker was still showing the outer solar system when I left. 12 Drell warships, 3 of them dark and drifting. And around them, still present, still watching, the quiet infrastructure of a species that had decided that saying no was not the end of the conversation. It was the beginning. The Galactic Council chamber was the largest enclosed space I had ever occupied, and I was not even physically in it. My holographic projection stood at the small circular platform reserved for non-member observers, which was positioned slightly lower than the main floor, which was the council's way of making certain you understood where you stood without having to say it outright. I appreciated the efficiency of the gesture. I had designed a few of my own over the years. The chamber was not quiet when I arrived. It was the opposite of quiet. 216 species, represented by their appointed delegates, were speaking across each other in something that the translation systems were struggling to keep up with. The ambient sound was a layered, overlapping wave of different frequencies and timbres, some beyond human hearing range, rendered by the translator implant behind my ear as a continuous hum of urgency. I had been told, before the session opened, that this was the most attended emergency session in 3,000 years of council history. The delegate from the Valkyrie Collective, a senior official named Orith, whose title translated roughly as Voice of the Long View, had personally confirmed the attendance record to Owen in a tone that suggested she was not certain whether she was impressed or horrified. I stood in my projection and waited. Director General Crane had wanted to attend as well. I had asked him not to, not because I doubted him, but because I needed the council to speak to a single face. When you send multiple people to a negotiation, the other side looks for cracks between them. I wanted to show them a wall. Council Chair Bethinvar, a member of the Salathi species and one of the oldest serving officials in galactic governance, brought the session to order by emitting a harmonic tone that every species in the room felt rather than heard. The chamber quieted within seconds. Whatever the tone was, it worked. Bethinvar acknowledged the nature of the emergency, the events of the past 48 hours, the request from the Drell hegemony for formal review, and the presence of the Earth government's representative. That last phrase, Earth government, was spoken without comment, without hesitation, and without the qualifier non-registered that had preceded every reference to humanity for as long as I had been attending council functions. I noted it. I said nothing. The first speaker was the Drell representative. His name, rendered into English, was something close to Vedrath, and he was not Vethorath. The hegemony had sent a diplomat rather than a commander, which was its own kind of signal. Vethorath was not present. I did not ask where he was. I had a reasonable idea of what a Drell commander's career looked like after an outcome like this one. Vedrath spoke for 22 minutes. He was precise, measured, and deeply skilled at the art of describing events without acknowledging responsibility for them. He spoke of the Sol system notification as a routine territorial administration matter. He spoke of the arrival of the advance fleet as a standard compliance verification visit. He spoke of the subsequent engagement as a regrettable misunderstanding arising from inadequate communication between parties operating under different legal frameworks. He did not use the word miscalculation. I had expected him to use it because Vethorath had used it in his initial message to the council. Vedrath was smarter than Vethorath. He had removed anything that sounded like an admission. He concluded by requesting a formal council review of Earth's territorial status, a 60-cycle suspension of all hegemony activities in the Sol system pending that review, and a censure of what he called Earth's unauthorized military deployment in registered hegemony space. The chamber responded with a level of noise that the translator rendered as heated disagreement, distributed roughly evenly across multiple positions, which meant that nobody was happy with what Vedrath had said, just for different reasons. 3 delegates moved immediately. The first, from a species called the Murath, demanded a censure of Earth for violating unregistered civilization conduct standards. The second, from the Tev Collective, demanded a censure of the Drell for initiating territorial claims without completing the mandatory notification and review process. The third, from a small species called the Ilan whose homeworld I had never heard mentioned before, simply asked whether humanity would be permitted to speak. Chair Bethinvar indicated yes. I was glad I had prepared, because I had approximately 40 people watching me in holographic form and several hundred watching through the room's observation systems. And I had learned in 15 years of diplomacy that the first 10 seconds of any address determines whether anyone genuinely listens to the rest. I did not begin by thanking the council for the opportunity to speak. I had heard that opening thousands of times. It meant nothing. I said I would like to start with a number. The number is 17. The chamber was already quieter than it had been. It got quieter. 17 civilizations received the same notification Earth received 8 months ago. I have spent time learning about each of those civilizations. Some of them were larger than us. Some were older. Several had technologies we do not yet possess. All of them were told, as we were told, that they occupied space belonging to the Drell hegemony and that they had a fixed period in which to leave. 16 of them eventually complied. 1 did not, and they are no longer here to speak at sessions like this one. I let that settle. I want to be honest with you about what Earth chose to do and why. We are not members of this council. We have no registered status. We have no rights under the legal frameworks you maintain, because we were never invited into those frameworks, and because your membership criteria have requirements that we were never given genuine support in meeting. I do not say this as an accusation. I say it as a fact, because I think facts should be the starting point of this conversation. Vedrath shifted slightly in his position. I noticed. We chose not to leave, not because we believed we had the legal right to stay. We had no legal status to invoke. We chose to stay because the alternative was the end of everything our species has ever built, everyone our species has ever loved, and every possibility our species has ever imagined. And because, when we looked honestly at our options, we determined that remaining and defending ourselves gave us a better probability of survival than compliance. I paused. I am aware that probability calculations of that kind are considered unsophisticated by galactic standards. We are a Class II civilization. We are pre-warp, pre-collective, and as one council notation I have read describes us, biologically volatile. I will accept all of those classifications. They are accurate. One of the Murath delegates made a sound that the translator described as skeptical amusement. I looked directly at that delegate. The advance fleet that entered our solar system 48 hours ago has been contained. 3 vessels are disabled. The remaining 9 are still present but have not moved in 22 hours. 6 months before that fleet arrived, Earth deployed long-range vessels to 3 Drell staging coordinates. Those vessels are still present. They have not engaged anyone. They broadcast a single message, and that message was the truth. We were able to reach those coordinates. We chose not to act. There is a meaningful distinction between those two things, and I believe this council is capable of understanding it. The chamber was very quiet now. Chair Bethinvar had not moved since I began speaking. Here is what I am asking, I said. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not asking for an apology from the Drell hegemony. I'm not asking this council to pretend that what happened over the past 8 months was handled correctly by anyone, including Earth. What I am asking is simple. Either Earth is recognized as a legitimate governing entity with standing before this council, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails, or it is not. If we are not recognized, then the Drell's claim is valid under your own law, and you should say so clearly, and we will respond accordingly. If we are recognized, then we have rights that this council is obligated to protect, and we should begin the conversation about what that looks like. I looked around the chamber. What you cannot continue to do is nothing. We are not a pigeon. We are not a curiosity. We are not a notation in a classification report. We are 8 billion people on a single planet who built, in 7 months, something this chamber has spent the past 2 days trying to understand. Whatever your models told you about human civilizations, I suggest you update them. I stopped there. The silence lasted 41 seconds. I know this because I counted, not because I was nervous, though I was, because I needed to know how long the silence was for the record and for my own understanding of what it meant. In 15 years, I had never heard that chamber go silent during an active session, not for 10 seconds, not for 5. 41 seconds of silence in a room containing 216 civilizations was not an absence of response. It was a response. It was the sound of a calculation being revised. Vedrath spoke first, and his tone had changed. Not dramatically, just precisely enough to mean something. He said the hegemony did not object to a formal review of Earth's territorial and legal status, pending council deliberation. He used the word pending in a way that would have sounded like evasion 2 days ago. Today it sounded like retreat. Then something happened that I had not planned for, and that I suspect no model on any Drell tactical computer would have predicted. Sorvith stood up. He was not scheduled to speak. The Velkari delegation had submitted no formal position on the matter. He stood, and he requested recognition from Chair Bethinvar, and he received it, because you did not ignore a senior Velkari delegate who chose to stand uninvited in an emergency session. It meant too much. He spoke for 3 minutes. He did not look at me while he spoke. He addressed the council directly, in the formal register of someone who had thought carefully about every word. He moved for emergency class 1 status recognition for Earth, on the grounds that an unrecognized civilization capable of the military and industrial output demonstrated over the past 8 months represented exactly the kind of actor the Council's membership framework was designed to integrate rather than exclude. He framed it as a matter of institutional stability. He said that a civilization of Earth's demonstrated capacity existing outside the Council's frameworks was a structural risk, not a management convenience. He said that the events of the past 48 hours had not changed what Earth was. They had simply made it visible. He sat down. The vote took 4 hours and 11 minutes of debate. When it was called, the result was 91 in favor, 64 against, and 61 abstentions, which in council terms constituted a majority and passed. Humanity received Emergency Provisional Class 1 status. The Drell hegemony formally withdrew its claim on the Sol system the following morning, in a statement that was significantly shorter than any of Vedrath's speeches. As my projection was deactivated, and I returned to physical awareness in the relay station near Geneva, the first message waiting for me was from Owen Drake. It was 5 words. I think we actually did it. The second message was from Sorveth. It was 3. Difficult road ahead. He was right. He was almost always right. I wrote back 2 words. I know. Then I went to find a chair and a cup of coffee, and I sat for 20 minutes doing nothing at all, which was the first 20 minutes of genuine stillness I had experienced in 8 months. Outside, it was morning in Geneva. The mountains were exactly where they had always been. The sky above them looked the same as it always had. But I was looking at it differently. Something had changed, and it was not going to change back. The weeks after the council session were strange in the particular way that follows any long and consuming effort. The pressure does not lift cleanly. It recedes the way water does after a flood, leaving behind evidence of everything it passed through. I stayed in Geneva for the first 2 weeks, not because I had to, but because I did not trust myself to manage the transition well if I moved too fast. I had seen it happen to other people after extended high-pressure operations. They return to ordinary life and find that ordinary life no longer feels proportion to the scale of what they have just been through. Things look small when they shouldn't. People seem to be talking about the wrong things. The gap between the world you were living in and the world everyone else was living in takes time to close. Owen Drake went home to Sheffield for 10 days. He called me on the 3rd day to report that he had cooked a meal, walked along a river, and felt, for approximately 20 minutes, like a person again. He said the 20 minutes had been very good. I told him to stay longer. He said he was already booked on a return flight. Admiral Ferris gave his first public interview and said 7 words about the engagement before the communications team intervened, and he spent the remaining 40 minutes talking about the history of deep space navigation. He was more comfortable talking about history than about himself, which I found admirable and also recognized as a survival strategy. Dr. Nina Aldridge published a paper, not about the AI coordination system she had built, about the migration patterns of a specific species of deep-sea organism she had been studying as a hobby for 11 years. She sent it to me before it went to the journal with a note that said, I needed to write about something that was not trying to defeat anyone. I read the whole paper. It was genuinely interesting. Patrick Hollies disappeared for a while. This was apparently normal for Hollies. Owen told me he always did this after a major operation. He would surface eventually, usually somewhere unexpected, with information that nobody else had yet. General Constance Ward did not take any time off. I tried to argue with her about this. She told me, without unkindness, that I was wasting my breath, and then she went back to reviewing the restructuring plan for the newly designated Earth Defense Infrastructure, which was what we were calling it publicly because Space Military Platform Grid was apparently too blunt for the communications team. I appreciated all of them, in the way that you come to appreciate the specific qualities of specific people when those qualities have saved everything. But what I spent the most time thinking about in those early weeks was not the engagement itself. It was the aftermath that nobody had fully predicted. The Drell withdrawal created a vacuum that the galaxy rushed to fill, not with more aggression, but with something stranger: interest. The kind of interest that comes with recalculation. Within 2 weeks of the council session, 8 different species had made formal inquiries through the Geneva liaison station. Not threats, not challenges, requests. They wanted to talk. Some of them wanted to talk about trade, some about technology exchange, some about what one TEV delegate called, in careful diplomatic language, mutual security arrangements, which is what every species calls a defense treaty when they want one, but do not want to be the first to say the word. The most surprising inquiry came from a small species called the elan, the same delegate who had asked in that chaotic council session whether humanity would be permitted to speak. The elan sent a single message to my office. It was not formal. It was addressed personally to me. It said, "We have been trying to be heard in that chamber for 60 years. We have been very polite about it. We would like to know how you did what you did, in case it is something that can be learned." I read that message 4 times, then I sent it to Sorvith. His response, when it came, was thoughtful. The elan are not the only ones asking that question. You should know that there are 12 other civilizations currently in situations with various degrees of similarity to what Earth experienced 8 months ago. Some of them have known about your story since the engagement. Some of them were watching the council session live. All of them are recalibrating. I called Owen and read him Sorvith's message. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So we didn't just solve our problem." "Apparently not," I said. "Did we plan for that?" "Absolutely not," I said. He laughed, which was the first time I had heard him laugh in a very long time, and it sounded like relief. It was Sorvith who put into words what none of us had quite articulated yet. He came to Geneva in person, unannounced, which was apparently a Valkyrie privilege available to senior diplomats in circumstances of significant galactic transition. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, accepted the same coffee I always offered him, and sat in the same chair across from my desk where he had sat months earlier. He looked less nervous than he had the last time, not calm exactly, but settled. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Something that I think you deserve to know, not as information but as context." "All right," I said. "The Valkyrie have been members of the Galactic Council for 900 years. In those 900 years we have watched many things. We have seen species rise. We have seen species disappear. We have seen the Council evolve slowly through careful incremental movement. That is how galactic governance works, or has worked. Very carefully, very slowly. Consensus before action, deliberation before commitment." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "The system has virtues. It prevents certain kinds of catastrophe, but it also prevents certain kinds of change. And over 900 years, there are patterns that develop. Patterns that nobody chose exactly, but that nobody effectively challenged either. The Drell pattern was one of them. It had been running for 400 years. Everyone in that chamber knew it was running. Most of them had seen evidence of it at various points. But the system requires consensus to act, and consensus requires risk, and risk is not something ancient institutions take comfortably." He looked up. "You disrupted a 400-year pattern in 8 months, not because you had more ships, not because you had better technology, because you were new enough to look at the situation without the assumption that the pattern was permanent. That is a thing I have seen only twice in 900 years of Valkyrie Council membership. The last time it happened, we were in a period of change for decades afterward." I thought about what he was saying. "That sounds like a warning," I said. "It is also an encouragement," he said. "They are sometimes the same thing." He stayed for 2 hours. We talked about things I had not discussed with anyone since before the deadline, about what it had felt like to draft those orders, about the specific weight of deciding that resistance was the better risk, about what it means to act for 8 billion people who have no idea what you are doing or how. He listened without trying to give me answers, which was the thing he was best at and the thing I most needed. When he left, I stood at the window for a while. The mountains were the same. The city below was the same. But something in the quality of the light felt different, which I knew was not actually true, and was just the way the mind translates large change into small observable details. The months that followed brought so many small observable details that eventually I stopped trying to hold them all at once. The new council membership framework took 14 months to negotiate in full. I negotiated it personally, along with a team of 7 that included Owen, Aldridge, and a constitutional law professor from Cape Town, named David Innes, who turned out to be extraordinarily good at translating galactic legal concepts into language humans could implement and vice versa. It was exhausting, occasionally absurd, and at one point resulted in a 3-week standoff over the precise definition of the word governance that I suspect will become a footnote in diplomatic history. Earth's full Class 1 membership was confirmed in the 16th month after the engagement. The ceremony was quiet by council standards. I accepted the credential on behalf of Earth, standing at the full delegate level rather than the observer platform. The height difference was small. It felt enormous. Sorvith voted yes, as the Velkari delegation's formal representative. He did not look at me when he did it. I did not need him to. The bilateral treaty with the Velkari Collective was ratified 3 months later. It was the first formal mutual recognition agreement Earth had ever signed with an extraterrestrial species, and it opened access to transit corridors that cut interstellar travel time for our vessels by roughly 40%. The Velkari received something that I think was more valuable to them, though harder to quantify. They received a partner that owed them nothing and respected them genuinely. In 900 years of council politics, those two qualities rarely appeared together. The Ilan situation resolved 18 months after the council session, when a formal review panel established in the new membership framework examined their territorial dispute and found in their favor. They sent me a message afterward that was longer than their usual communications. It described, in careful and exact terms, what it had felt like for their representatives to sit in that chamber and hear a decision go in their direction for the first time. It was one of the most moving things I read in those years, and I read it to Owen over the phone, and then we were both quiet for a moment. "We couldn't have planned that," he said eventually. "No," I said. "Is that the part that bothers you?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "That's the part that makes me think we did the right thing." Patrick Hollies resurfaced, as Owen had predicted, in an unexpected place. He appeared in the Velkari diplomatic quarter on the council station, where he had apparently been for 6 weeks having conversations with intelligence officials from 4 different species about the surveillance architecture that had allowed the Drell to operate unmonitored for so long. He sent me a summary document that was 43 pages long and began with the sentence, "You are going to find this uncomfortable." He was correct. It was also necessary. General Ward finally took a week of leave in the 22nd month after the engagement. She went to a mountain region in Canada and apparently spent 4 days hiking before she called the Defense Command with a procedural question on the 5th day. Owen told me this with a tone of fond exasperation. I told him I was glad she went. On the 3rd anniversary of the original Drell transmission, I was asked to give a public address, not to the council, to Earth. It was the first time I had spoken publicly to my own planet in any extended way since all of this began, and I was more nervous about it than I had been about anything at the council session. I wrote the address myself, without help. I wanted it to sound like what I actually thought, because I had spent 15 years being diplomatic in ways that sometimes required me to say things more carefully than I meant them, and I did not want to do that with the people I had been doing all of this for. I said that I was not going to describe what happened as a victory, because victory implies an endpoint, and this was not an endpoint. I said that what we had done was not heroic in the way stories usually mean when they use that word. It was determined and resourceful, and at times very frightened, and sometimes it was driven by anger at a situation that was profoundly unfair, and all of those things were human in ways that the galaxy had not expected, and that I hoped we would not pretend otherwise. I said that the seat at the table was real now, and it was ours, and it came with genuine responsibility that I was not going to minimize. I said that other species were watching us, some with hope and some with apprehension, and both of those things were appropriate and both of them should matter to us. I said that Sorvith had told me 900 years of Velkari Council history, and the thing I thought about most from that conversation was not the 900 years. It was the idea that the patterns which have run long enough start to feel permanent to the people living inside them. And the way patterns change is when something arrives that does not know it is supposed to leave them alone. I did not say that we had done everything right. We had not. I did not say that the road ahead was clear. It was not. I said that we had, against most expectations including some of our own, demonstrated that humanity at its best is not loud or reckless or merely stubborn. It is something more specific than that. It is a species that does its best work when someone tells it something is impossible, because then it gets very quiet and very focused, and it starts building. The address was received well, I was told. I don't remember much of the immediate aftermath. I remember that Owen was there, and that he looked pleased in the quiet way he had, and that afterward we walked for a while in the city without talking very much, and it was the best part of the day. Sorvith contacted me a few days later, not through official channels, through the encrypted personal line, the same way he had at the beginning of all of this. He said he had watched the address. He said he thought I had said the important things. Then he said, "The council is going to change, not because of what you said, because of what you did, and because of what others are beginning to do watching you. It is going to be harder and slower and more contentious than you want it to be, but it is going to change." I wrote back, "Is that a good thing?" He took a long time to answer. When he did, he wrote, "It is a necessary thing. In my experience, those are often the same." I sat with that for a while. Outside my office window, the Geneva evening was settling in the way it always did, with the mountains going pale and the city lights beginning to appear below them. The same mountains they had always been, the same city, the same sky. But when I looked at the stars above the mountains now, I looked at them differently than I had 3 years ago, when the screens had all lit up at once, and a creature with 4 eyes told 8 billion people to go. Not as a ceiling, not even as a direction, as a place we were already part of. Whatever the galaxy thought it knew about us before the transmission, before the deadline, before the silent 7 months and the 11 minutes, and the 41 seconds of quiet in a chamber that had not gone quiet in 3,000 years, it knew something different now. We were not a notation, we were not a classification, we were not a pigeon. We were a species that had looked at the stars our whole lives and wondered what was out there, and then one day found out, and decided that what was out there did not get to decide for us. I think about the Thren sometimes, a species that no longer exists because they said no once and then ran out of time and resources, and the particular kind of stubborn hope that keeps people going when the mathematics look wrong. I do not know what they were like. I do not know what they built or how they loved or what they believed or what they were afraid of. They are gone, and the galaxy moved on, and most of the civilizations in that council chamber probably stopped thinking about them a very long time ago. But I think about them, because we almost joined them, and we did not. And that is not a small thing, even when the days go ordinary and the mountains stay the same and the coffee is just coffee again. We said no. We meant it. We built something in 7 months that the galaxy had not modeled for us, and then we stood in the chamber that had ignored us and we told them the truth plainly, and 41 seconds of silence was the sound of the universe adjusting to the fact that we were not going anywhere. They gave us a seat at the table. Some of them immediately regretted it. Some of them were relieved. I think the ones who were relieved understood something the others were still learning. The galaxy had been going through its patterns for a long time, and patterns that run long enough start to feel like gravity. And what was needed, eventually, was not a more powerful species or a more sophisticated technology or a longer history. What was needed was something new enough to look at the pattern and say, this is not a law. This is just what happened to go unchallenged. We were not the most powerful species in the galaxy. We were not the oldest or the most advanced or the most coordinated. We were biologically volatile, pre-warp, pre-collective, and thoroughly unregistered. We were also, as it turned out, exactly what the moment required. I close my notebook and look at the mountains. The light is changing the way it always changes here in the evening, slowly and then all at once. Tomorrow there is a council subcommittee meeting about interstellar transit regulations. It will be very long and extremely detailed, and at least 2 delegates will speak past their allotted time. I will drink too much coffee and take careful notes and argue precisely when arguing is necessary, and listen carefully when listening is more useful. It is the work. It is not glamorous. It is exactly what has to be done next. We were never dangerous by accident. We were never reckless without reason. We were just a species that had been waiting, without quite knowing it, for someone to make all of this necessary. And when they did, we got very quiet and very focused, and we got to work. We always do.